Ladies and gentlemen, this week on The Unconventional Pastor, Bob Graves begins a new series called Everybody Loves Phil. Who's Phil? Well, we're going to find out in just a moment.
Unconventional Pastor. And tonight I have a guest with me, a gentleman by the name of Phil Giudice. And Phil Giudice is a guy that I have known since I was a teenager. We've both musicians hanging around town, doing different things, but we never really played in a band together until, about 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah. And you know, so we knew of each other. But anyhow, part of what I want to do tonight is I want to talk a little bit about a concept of, and as I've talked about this numerous times, just who do you think you are? We each have a concept of who it is we think we are, and that concept of who it is we think we are radically constrains how we can relate to the world and how well things work for us. And one of the things that's true about something which we can call life coaching, which is something that, by the way, a lot of people who've turned away from churchianity have sometimes turned to it. Sometimes we can use advice and help for people who can tell us how to do the kinds of things that we do a little bit better. So that life coaching isn't really therapy in a sense. It's not a way of trying to help people who just can't cope with life. Rather, it's a way of trying to take people who have things going for them rather well. They're working, they're living, they're loving, and their life is moving on. But in some ways, they'd like to learn how to do some of these things better. Approach things with much more efficiency, much more clarity. And this involves, particularly when it comes to living your life, having a clearer sense of just who are you, just who you are. And so I've talked to Phil a number of times in the past about various questions where he asks me certain things, and we chit-chat back and forth. And I feel like in that relationship, there have been times in the past I've been of some help to you.
Oh, yeah.
And so
yeah.
I thought it might be great if we just kind of shared some of this concept and what we're doing with others. So, Phil, just say hello to everybody here and get the...
Hello, everybody.
Yeah. And Phil is in some ways another one of these, as you know, I know a few vampires, because Phil is one of these people who just doesn't get older. He's my age. Here I am, white-haired and decrepit. And he's a good, robust, and strong plaster contractor, and has been doing that. Your dad actually was into that.
Yeah.
And so he's the one who kind of apprenticed you, brought you through that, and you've been doing this all your adult life.
40 years.
Yeah.
40 years in the business.
And I know he's good at it because I actually hired him to do some work in my basement. And he was so good at it that when he gave me the bill, I said, "This is awful," and I had to pay him actually more than what was on the bill. But no, you did a great job, really did.
Thank you.
And it was awesome. But anyhow, when it comes to concepts of self, I'm of the opinion that there's a sense in which in our lives we struggle with three different versions of who we are. Mm-hmm. Well, we actually struggle with two of them when we should really struggle with all three. The ones that we struggle with the most, there's the person you project to the world. And that's the person we all react with. That's not who you think you are, but it's the person you project to the world. And that's all we can deal with, because that's all we really see. And as you know, the person you project to the world is not always the you think you are. Then there's the you think you are. But that's usually something that's not who you really are. That's just someone you think you are, and sometimes the person you project to the world is a compensation for that person, particularly if you're uncomfortable with that person in some ways. But the person that you really are is the person you would think you were if while you were developing your sense of self, you'd been fair, kind, honest, and able to really think it through in a more clear fashion. But as happens to most of us, we grow up in a world where mom, dad, brother, sister, neighbors, friends, they all push upon all of us a version of you they want you to believe is you, and to the degree they're able to prevail and you don't have the wherewithal to fight it off, you'll sometimes buy into it and accept it. And then once you've bought into it and accept it, that kind of defines you in a way that isn't really you. And it prevents you from being able to move forward in a far more efficient fashion. So basically, that's the kind of a concept we're talking about. Now, one of the things that I want to make sure that we understand is this. I don't want us to have the kind of a relationship where I'm the expert and you're just the little student. I don't believe that. Just as you are very good at working with plaster, I don't know anything about it. I've never worked with it, Mm-hmm. So too, I'm a person who has worked with self-concepts and concepts. So if there's something that I know that you don't, it's simply because in many ways I've worked with it, So I don't want this to become a relationship where, well, that's very nice, Phil. Now let me help you, you helpless little fool, you. That's not the concept that we want to work with here. Rather, I'm somebody who's focused on these kinds of things, and I may have some things that can be of help to you. But the truth is, I myself have gone through a lot of these things where my sense of self has been hurt through limited, fixed, and limiting beliefs that weren't real. I think back even my own childhood. Let me give you an example of some of the things that kind of distorted me in my sense of self. My mom and dad, I can never recall any time that whenever I had a conflict with others, that they ever caved, ever. Many incidents that happened. Now, the thing is this, all of us have a far more powerful emotional memory than we have a rational memory. So we remember the way we felt during specific incidents more than we remember just these general things. In fact, sometimes the generalizations we do are just the summary we've learned to talk about. But I don't live in those summaries. I live in those memories and those feelings. A couple of those moments in my own life. I remember one time there was a music teacher at Maine Endwell Middle School. Back then it was called the junior high. He was a music teacher, and I used to like to go in there, and he would sometimes let me listen to records that I bring in, because my parents wouldn't let me listen to records on their record player, and I didn't have one of my own. So I'd sometimes listen to the Beatles and stuff like that, and sometimes he'd even let me play the piano there in the music room. But he was one of these very odd teachers who just very unstable. One time he gave me permission to play on the piano, and he left the room, and then he came back in, and he saw me playing the piano, and he didn't remember giving me permission. And he picked me up by the nape of the neck, and he threw me against the wall. Wow. When I complained to my parents about this, my father's response was more along the lines of, well, I don't know what you had done or said to him to make him feel that he needed to do that, but whatever it was, you need to stop doing that. My dad was not going to come to my defense in any way. My mom took a similar position. I remember another event that happened where, there was a time I was not a fighter at all back then. I was kind of timid and you knew me. I was skinny and tiny. I wasn't. I was since fattened up a bit.
Look at him now.
But one time in the backyard of these other guys, two of these boys, beating the crap out of me and stuffing dog poop they're finding on the ground into my shoes. And I go home and I talk to my parents about what's going on. They were not the least bit interested in getting involved in this. Now, it's not because they were cowards. It's not because they weren't the kind of people who just didn't like to get involved. And I mean, they fought their own battles very, very well. But they just didn't seem to understand or appreciate where a kid is coming from. And frankly, they were busy with their own lives doing what they're doing. They didn't want to spend the time. Now, part of in sharing that story, that gave to me, I didn't feel like, well, look at the problem they have. They won't, they're not meeting their responsibility. This teacher who's behaving in a manner that is just absolutely unacceptable, I didn't think it that way. I thought, oh, well, I guess I better stop doing whatever I was doing,
I deserved it.
And yeah, and so I ended up seeing myself as somebody who, in ways I couldn't figure out, was behaving inappropriate and inviting this stuff, and I didn't know what, and I couldn't figure it out, and it caused me to become a very meek, intimidated, and self-loathing person. Now, that was because of the way that I embraced an insight of these particular events that emotionally hit me. And I got to tell you that for years, that really affected the way I interacted with the world. Now, as you know, we all say, I would like to treat everybody the same. We often talk that way, right?
Right.
But you know, the truth is, I'm going to say I don't think we should, but we really don't. The truth is, sometimes you're dealing with somebody who's difficult, you get your dander going. You know, sometimes you're dealing with somebody who's being very kind, you're going to be far more congenial, right? So there's a saying, we're going to ignore the phone. I have no idea who's calling us now at this hour.
They're starting to call in.
Yeah, well, but yeah, we're just going to have to let that go. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. We got rid of that call. Anyway, where were we? We were talking about that call kind of...
It kind of threw you off.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
You were talking about
right, the way we project ourselves to the world.
Right.
Different people. Now, therefore, you treat people differently because of the way they present themselves to you. Right?
Right.
So what you may not have stopped to think about is this. People treat you the way they treat you because of how you present yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so therefore, if who you present yourself as is in some ways a compensation for who it is you're really, perhaps in some ways, ashamed or afraid to be,
Mm-hmm.
you may not even be aware of how it is you come across. For example, people who feel stupid, they might learn to lower their voice and speak with more articulation and more determination to try to come across as if they're really very intelligent. And this is their way of dealing with feeling like maybe they're really not as intelligent as they wish they were. And they don't realize they come across as fake and plastic and various other things, you know. They think they're coming across intelligently. In a similar manner, if there's some way in which you don't feel adequate to life, you present yourself in a way that appears more adequate, but you may not realize that it is actually a way of behaving that could say something to them very differently. It could say things like, kick me, you know, or I don't like to fight, and so if you want to cheat me, I'm an easy target, you know. And meanwhile, you're just trying to be nice, right? Now, things like this can happen. We all make this sort of mistake. This isn't just the kind of thing that people who are mental cases. We all make these sorts of mistakes. And there's nothing in life really that helps us to discover these mistakes and learn from them, except perhaps maybe therapy. But do we all have to go to therapy just to kind of grow up? That doesn't seem right to me. The other thing that is of interest perhaps to our audience is this, that most of the audience that listens to my show are people who've come out of churchianity, people who are still, many of them still believe in God, but they're just not into this system. And in church, many times the lessons you get there are, you're a sinner by nature. If it weren't for Jesus, God would hate you. You know, and these other messages that kind of confirm a lot of those not so comfortable feelings we might have about ourselves. So religion doesn't always help us. Not all institutions are kind of pushing that sort of message. And not all of them mean to emphasize that message. But deep down inside where it hurts, deep down inside where you have a sense of yourself, that's what sticks, right? Mm-hmm. Can you identify with that?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
Now, can you think of any now, I share with you an incident that occurred in my own life that I see as, in a sense, a moment that where the emotions that I felt during that shaped who it is I thought I was. Any particular incidents that stand out to you? And they would stand out to you?
Similar circumstance
of anything, perhaps.
When I was growing up, when I was a kid?
Yeah. So maybe something involves, mom, dad, kids, neighbors, school, whatever.
Well, I started out in Catholic school.
Uh-huh.
First first, second grade, and I was diagnosed with dyslexia.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that had something to do with the way I reacted to my surroundings.
I'm sure it did.
I was spelling backwards. I was adding and subtracting backwards. And I had a need to entertain.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in third grade, the nun would give me 10 minutes.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, to just, okay, entertain. Entertain, go ahead. Get it out of your system. And I think, in retrospect, I think I was masking what I felt inside.
Mm-hmm.
I felt inadequate. I felt stupid. I felt unworthy. And some of that still is within me.
Which I think is normal for most people. Yeah.
I feel unworthy. And I think it stems from way back my early childhood. I used to have wicked temper tantrums. I don't know what the cause.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't pinpoint.
Did being identified as dyslexic, was that for you an identification of a condition that you had, or was it an identification of an ineptitude you demonstrate?
Ineptitude.
Right. Depending on the way it's, I mean, the truth is dyslexic people exist, and they exist this way for neurological reasons. It's not as if,
I might add that I was held back twice in school. I started out in Catholic school up to third grade. My mother thought the nuns were incompetent, sent me back to public school. And I just felt that always stayed with me.
Right.
I was held back twice.
Yeah.
I must be pretty, I can't be that smart. I mean, it was always in my mind.
And intelligence has nothing to do with dyslexia, but...
Well, yeah. But I mean, I was held back. Kids would make fun of me.
Yeah.
Kids were always picking on me.
Yeah. And it's true that you're dyslexic, so it seems valid.
Yeah, but they didn't know what dyslexia was.
No, but they certainly knew that the teachers were having a problem with it. And so you became, in a sense, maybe even a target as a result of that.
Yeah.
And of course...
And I would lash out at kids.
Yeah.
I'd start fights.
Defending. Yeah. And now I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think you can realize it makes a lot of sense. But you can see how it's not even really so much what the condition was, but how the condition was dealt with, treated, and the style that it implied messages about you.
Mm-hmm.
This is where our fixed and limiting beliefs start to come from. They don't come from ourselves, really. They come from
outside,
what other people are doing. However, they never hurt us until we believe they're valid. So there's a sense in which, although other people may have started picking on you, the teacher was not happy with or respectful of your dyslexia in a way that they perhaps should have been, it was when you bought into the fact that this says something about you that makes you inept, that it didn't hurt you until then. But once you bought into that, you're damaged.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're all damaged in that way. There's not a single kid who grows up, because, when you're a kid, do you really understand why adults behave in ways they shouldn't? I mean, when I'm a kid, do I understand? I think his name was Mr. Jones. I can't recall if that was his real name, but this music teacher. When I'm a kid, I don't understand why Mr. Jones would come into the room and throw me against the wall. I don't know. I mean, I barely know why I do the things I do, let alone him, some adult, And so it's impossible for a kid to grow up without at times making sense of why other people do what they do. And almost all children, well, I should say almost all children end up almost all the time coming up with an explanation that blames themselves. It's just the way we are.
It's got to be me.
Right.
It's got to be me.
Because if you're trying to make a difference and you can't, and that's part of what living life is and negotiating it publicly, you're trying to make a difference and you can't. Must be you.
But are we wired a certain way when we're young?
Well,
we're wired a certain way.
Certainly. But I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, we can change the wiring as we grow older.
The wiring does change. In fact, oddly enough, there's some rather unusual things about children. When you realize the rate at which children acquire language, there is something quite ingenious going on there. Particularly when you figure out what is the average vocabulary of an 8-year-old, and you realize how many words a day they must have been able to acquire to do that. Shows that there's a great deal of generative insight into language that they are understanding even though they couldn't articulate it. And then by the time they get older, try and learn French when you're 30.
Yeah.
English, you just picked up on it being around it, you know. Whereas,
but let me ask you something.
So the wiring is different.
Don't we have, back in when I was a child and when you were a child, in our generation, we're talking about the 50s, 60s, we didn't have all the aids that we have today to help us.
To help us, right.
Through crises.
Right.
We didn't have it. It was very limited.
No.
I mean, we had psychiatrists, psychologists, but knowledge has increased so much.
It has. And I think in some cases...
And I think that was part of the reason why I was the way I was. We didn't have the aids. We didn't have people we could talk to.
They didn't know. In fact, the reason why we have them today is because they failed our generation in ways. No, they didn't mean to fail us. They didn't know it was going to be relevant. And, you know, every generation thinks they're going to fix the world. We thought we were going to fix the world. And now we're looking at our kids saying, oh, where did I go wrong? You know.
Well, no, but would you agree, Bob, that back then, the environment, the kids back then were a little tougher. What I mean by tougher, someone died in the class, someone our age died.
Yeah. There's more resilience.
You didn't need 20 counselors coming into school, right? To take care of the kids. I mean, it was okay. It's just reality.
Right.
One of our friends has passed away, and maybe there's some residual feelings.
Right.
20 years from now.
Right. Sure. I agree with that. And in fact, part of what you're saying is that although our knowledge of psychology and sociology has enlarged, we sometimes apply it in a way that isn't needed or actually hurts. In fact, suppose you have a child who is abused in some way, and you bring that child in to a counselor to talk to that counselor. If the counselor reacts, and hopefully a well-trained counselor won't do it, but if the counselor reacts like, oh, honey, what did they do to you? You know? You're sending a message to the child.
Right.
They did something awful to you. Oh, no. You know, and you're actually, you're doing something to cause the child to embrace a view of the damage done to them that they may not have otherwise embraced.
Right.
And so sometimes those good intentions go a little bit. So we're learning each generation. In some generations, we kind of ignored this. Then we tried to work with it, and we ended up enabling more problems. You know, so eventually we're going to get it right. But anyway, what did you think of my theory that I began to speak about the three different selves? There's the self you project to the world. There's the self that deep down inside you believe you are, your personal self. But then there's really an authentic self, the real you, that is someone, in some ways, you haven't gotten to know yet. Does that
makes sense? Makes sense, yes.
I would even argue that there are several signs that if the self you project to the world is radically different than the self inside, this is an indication to me, as I would understand it, that the real self is someone you are really distant from. Whereas the more you are really familiar with and comfortable with who you really are, the less there'll be this difference between the projected self and the sense of self inside. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because there's not as much compensation needed to be. Now, I would also argue this. The self you project to the world doesn't have to be the same as the self you see inside. For example, there may be certain things that, we all have certain things that trouble us. This is of no concern to people who are the kind of people who would use that against us. They don't need to know that. They have no right to know that. And so I don't think we all should be going around being so transparent that we're just honest with everybody about who it is we think we are. I don't think they're entitled to that information. But the more radical the difference...
You're talking about people who wear their heart on their sleeve?
Perhaps. There's all sorts of different examples of it. But there are people out in this world who are not going to be kind or fair with you, and they don't need to know where your vulnerabilities are. And so you don't need to be wearing them out, for them to see.
Right.
So if there's a way in which if you're a person who's afraid of a fight, there's nothing wrong with showing those kind of people who just love to beat you up that you can be tough. And I'm speaking metaphorically. Hopefully we're at an age now where we're no longer getting in fist fights.
Can I interrupt you for a
Sure,
minute?
go ahead.
No, I think what I'm getting from this conversation is there are a lot of instances where we're not really true to ourselves.
Correct.
We're not really true. We don't remain true to what's inside of us.
And I'm saying that what's inside of us is sometimes a betrayal of us, as well as what we project to others is a betrayal of us.
Right.
Both can be a betrayal.
So does that make sense to
Yes,
you? What I just
absolutely.
said?
Right. And what I'm trying to say is that the self we project is a fiction. The self we feel inside, that also is a fiction often. So what we need to do is we need to learn to break free from both fictions. And when we do that, there will be less of a difference between those two fictions. There will be, And so here's some things I wrote down that are signs that you're kind of living in a fictional understanding of who you are. People who bury themselves in excessive materialism. They don't know who they are. They're just busying themselves with, if they have some skills and abilities that allow them to
get
right,
they forget themselves.
Yeah, hey, just go for it. Is basically what they're doing. People who live with an overwhelming sense of anxiety and depression. These are people who have been denying their true selves in a manner that puts them into double binds of various sorts that cause them either to feel like they're incompetent to make the decisions the future requires, or that it is hopeless, the circumstances and situations they're in. And so a certain amount of anxiety and depression is normal for life. But people who are overwhelmed by it, that's, to me, I understand it as a sign of having lost yourself somewhere. And finding yourself somewhere will reduce that to normal levels, And so that's a sign that I see of this. Another sign I put on is when you have no clue how you really feel about things. And how do you feel? I don't know. Or the way you feel is constantly flip-flopping. Well, that bothers me. Well, I understand.
You're unconvicted.
But,
You're unconvicted.
Yeah.
And life.
And you don't have
no strong convictions.
Nothing stands still. Yeah. By the way, we have a viewer comment. Bob, can you expand on how the self inside can be a fiction? Are you suggesting that no one deep down inside is a selfish, greedy materialist, etc.? Well, this might take a different show to even talk about, but I would argue that yes. I would say that the person who has resorted to greedy materialism is a person who's compensating for a lost sense of the real self. And so I don't see it as natural. I see it as the outworkings and outcome of a damaged and distorted sense of self. And this can be very deep and very pervasive. And in truth, none of us have a deeper inner sense of self that isn't something we are totally convinced of. In fact, it's interesting to me to note that sometimes when you talk to people who have a terrible self-image, that although these people think of themselves as radically inadequate, if you try to suggest to them that their sense of self is in any manner inaccurate, it is amazing what a high opinion they have of their own opinion of themselves. So it's kind of strange. The validity and accuracy that they hold on to their view of self. It is a very powerful illusion, but I see the sense we have of ourselves as always a fiction, and that's true of healthy and unhealthy people. The difference between it being healthy and unhealthy is that healthy people have a sense of self that is for them merely a working model, And we can't function in the world without having some sense of who I am, what I can do, what my abilities really are. But the people who are convinced that, and this is it, I just can't do this, and I can do this, these are not people who are willing to be flexible or uncomfortable being flexible to discover their abilities are going to come, their abilities are going to go. They're things they've never done before, and maybe the reason why they've never done them is just they haven't never done them yet. Maybe they never could do them. They don't know. So a healthier person has less of a bond to this fictional self, but all of us have to have that working model. So anyway, that's a basic answer. So I do believe that as human beings, we are naturally wired to have great respect for ourselves and to live healthy lives, and without that sort of damage, or when we can overcome the kind of damage that derails that, we can definitely become kind, good, loving, functioning people who function very well. Anyway, let me go back to some of these other things I wrote down here that I see as signs. When you lack the courage to be who you really are in any situation, when you have an opinion and you don't dare share it because you don't want to get into deal with people, when there's times when you're in a conflict in a relationship and you really can't express what you need out of it because of the riffraff, the difficulty that's going to
the blowback.
Right. When you don't have the courage to be yourself in a situation, to me, I see that as an indication that there's a sense of part of yourself you've lost, and the self you're trying to be isn't quite the accurate real you either. And then another thing is that if you hate your job, if you hate your life, if you hate your relationships, if you hate your marriage, if you hate everything else about it, this is an indication that something is lost, because I do believe that human beings who are healthy and have a healthy sense of self will find themselves capable of adapting and working within any circumstance and situation in which they may find themselves. It may not be the best situation in the world, but it will be a situation in which they will say, I can do this. I mean, I think of an example as my house was flooded twice. Now, when the floods came, I didn't say, oh, happy, happy, joy, joy. I'm so glad I have this challenge to face in my life and to demonstrate how I can overcome all of these difficulties. That's not how I reacted to it. There may have been a few four-letter words or something like that. But at the same time, I got to be honest with you. When these floods destroyed my home, both Lisa and I had more of a sense of, well, we wouldn't have chosen this, but we're up to the task, and we felt adequate to life, that we can do this. We will find a way. Even if we didn't know how that was going to happen, we were ready to put one foot in front of another, and we had a healthy sense of self, even when we didn't know. I mean, I had no idea I could be that kind of a carpenter. Never done it before.
Right.
I didn't know I could rebuild a house.
Right.
Right. But you saw the house I rebuilt.
Yeah.
Wasn't bad.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
And then we had to move into this place, which somebody else built, and I wish that I'd built it. Well, I hired you to do the work in the basement.
He became the carpenter, plumber, electrician.
It was fun.
Did a great job in his house.
Yeah, and I had to rise to the occasion.
And it made you a stronger person?
It did. And it also helped, to be honest with you, it helped confirm to me that some of the notions that I have as a life coach, as a person who even tries to be of consulting value to people like you, made me feel like, well, I guess I do know a little bit of what I'm talking about.
You went through a traumatic, horrible experience.
But although those are some of the signs I would see of a lost self, there's the biggest sign that I see of a person who's not lost. A person who's not lost they don't necessarily know who they are, but they're not afraid of who that might be. They're comfortable being who they are in every and any situation. It is difficult to even put them in a circumstance where they feel they need to defend their existence. They don't feel put on the spot. And in fact, oddly enough, an example of this that a lot of people are going to be familiar with is a guy that a lot of people don't like, and that's Simon Cowell. Have you ever seen people criticize Simon Cowell to his face? He doesn't feel the need to defend himself most of the time.
He may be watching this.
Right, yeah. Hi, Simon. And he's not going to get involved in a fight. he feels very confident that even some of the things he has said that maybe not were said very tactfully are nonetheless correct. The people he's criticized, when he said, well, that was awful, he believes they were awful. He's comfortable saying it's awful when he thinks it's awful, Now, I'm not saying that everything he does is right, or necessarily that there wouldn't be better ways of doing it, but he is a person who is extremely comfortable.
That's his core.
He's extremely comfortable being who he is, saying what he thinks, and moving forward with it. And when confronted, isn't uncomfortable with being confronted, And so there's a sense here where this is a person who has a sense of who he is, that he's comfortable with. Now, like I said, we're always, the person we think we are isn't us, is still a fiction. But as long as we're comfortable that we're having a healthy relationship. So basically today is a little bit of the setup for some of the future times we're going to talk. What I'm trying to establish today is I'm trying to sell you and sell them, as it were, to use a marketing term, on the notion that we do have some work that we could all do to discover a better relationship we have with ourselves. When you have a better relationship with yourself, you're going to be far more comfortable presenting the real you to the world. And the real you will be a you love, you respect, and you even admire. You can become one of the people who's one of the leading influences in your life. You can be that person to you. And the more you understand, appreciate, and value who you really are, the more you're comfortable being that person in public and presenting who you are and not allowing people to walk over that person. You present yourself differently to the world. And just as you react differently to different people based on how they're presenting themselves to you, people will react differently to you when your core sense of self is a healthier understanding of who you are. And the truth is, this ends up doing that without you even having to think about it. For example, and I don't want to embarrass you any, but we know somebody who has sometimes treated you with hostility, and you sometimes internally you would.
He's still a nice guy now. I still like him.
Right. Yeah. This is a confession. No. But there were times when this would happen, you would hesitate as if almost to cower back. And in some sense, part of the reason why you did that is because this person who was hostile was pointing out flaws you did have. Right?
Can I interject something here?
Sure.
Have any of you seen Back to the Future? McFly?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I don't like confrontation.
Right. And
right?
Exactly.
That's basically it.
And there was a time though when you were ready to confront this other person, and I advised you that I think you need to confront them, but I don't think you should do it alone. Right. And so you did this with other people, including myself.
Didn't have the skills.
And you did this with other people there, but we didn't necessarily get involved. We just were there as support so this person couldn't bowl you over.
So he couldn't kill me.
Right. Yeah, you're still alive, thank God. But the point being is that he said some things that pointed out, not all of us we don't all come with full strengths. We all have weaknesses and you're no different from the rest of us in that regard. So when he points out some of these things and begins to beat you down with it, the fact that you didn't have that in a strong sense of internal respect is what causes you to cower back. Instead of saying, look, maybe I don't do everything perfect, but I'll tell you what, there's not any way that this is acceptable that you can be treating me in this manner, getting hostile with me, being threatening, and being upset is your problem, not mine. I'm doing the best I can, and if that isn't good enough for you, tough beans. You didn't have now. If you'd known yourself a little bit better and had that stronger respect, you would have projected that sort of person to him in a manner where he would say, "Well, can't pick on Phil. That just ain't going to work," and he had to go pick on somebody else.
The guy's dead right now, so
yeah, we killed him. No,
little humor. No. Hope you don't mind.
Yeah. I told him it was a confession. No, he's not dead, but not in the literal sense. But anyhow, that is an example of how a stronger sense of yourself would have presented a very different presence in those situations.
Absolutely, I agree.
And so there's a sense here in which your processes of going through this have kind of backed you into some corners that are really, I would say, inappropriate for you. You're a much more valuable person than that. You've got far more skills than this, and even the skills that you haven't developed, you've got every good reason for having not developed them. And I'll tell you what, when you make a mistake, guess what? There's an excellent opportunity for you to develop that skill.
And let me interject something that's important. I think a lot of these traits we pick up from maybe our parents.
Oh, yes. Sure.
No, seriously.
Yeah, we copy them or react to them.
Well, my father, had similar traits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have similar traits.
Yeah.
He would avoid confrontation.
And, you know, I have similar traits to my dad, too. And not all of them are necessarily traits that were good for him. But I tend to be an adamant person. I tend to use what I know as leverage, you know, and things like and what have you. Now I'm trying to be what I think is more sensitive and fairer than he was, but I do see a lot of, and some of these are just mean personality wiring. I don't know. And by the way, that brings me to something here that I think is very important to say. I don't believe we can ever really know who we really are. I don't think we need to know who we really are. I think we just need to be comfortable with what that might be and are comfortable working with a working model. That keeps us away from fixed and limiting beliefs, allows us to grow where we can.
Right.
And where we can, we will.
Right.
And where we can't, we won't. And we don't ever really need to be able to nail down those differences.
And be consistent about it.
Maybe. I don't know that consistency is really necessary either. Because as you become a more mature person, you will change. You know, you will be inconsistent in that way, in a good way.
Yeah.
I would say that being
each situation.
Correct. Right. You'll be flexible and adaptable as would be appropriate.
Right.
You know, which is, you know, dealing with that politically correct but false philosophy that we're supposed to treat all people the same. No, we need to treat all people in a manner that is effective in dealing with them where they are, that is kind and compassionate. But at the same time, if there's people who walk all over us, we need to draw a line. If there's people who are letting us, kind of almost inviting us to walk all over them, we need to encourage them to be a little bit more bold. You know, so we're going to treat people differently. You know, and I hopefully in a way that teaches us all that, you know, that there's a certain amount of respect and dignity we need to give to all human beings. So, you know, tonight, in a sense, we haven't really dealt with a lot of these issues yet. We're really just kind of setting the stage to talk about why what we're going to be doing in the coming weeks can be a useful process. And let me just say this. It is very brave of you to come on here and allow us to talk about your life, the way you're processing this, the way we're going to discuss some of the things that may have happened in your past in terms of how they give you a sense of self, and talking about some of the strengths and weaknesses you may think you have, and finding a way of where you're going to discover that everybody loves Phil, and so should you, you know? Oh. And so I want to thank you so much for what you're doing, because this is a very brave thing for you to do, a very vulnerable thing for you to do, and I appreciate the fact that you trust me enough that you're willing to participate in this with me. And I'll be honest with you, I really think that as we go through this, we will talk about things that many people out there will be able to relate to, and this is going to help them a lot. Mm-hmm. They're going to find strength, they're going to find encouragement, they're going to find they're a lot like you, they're a lot like me, and that therefore, you know, this can be some very useful information to talk about. Mm-hmm. What's your impression so far?
I feel very positive about it.
Excellent. Yeah.
Very
excellent.
positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I feel very comfortable.
Good. Great. Yeah. Well, that'll change.
I think I've already changed. And another important thing, I don't know if you mentioned it, it takes a little skill to articulate
It does. It does. Yeah, and particularly when we've
certain
learned to bury them.
situations, because
Yeah.
you need the skills.
Yeah.
And I think it's a learned thing.
Yeah. Let's
to
see if
some
we
degree.
have viewer comment. I love Simon. Well, maybe you could use some coaching too.
He'll be on. He'll be on in a few more weeks.
Yeah. I'll tell you what. I'm a musician. You're a musician. And I got to be honest with you, although sometimes I think that Simon could be kinder, more often than not, I have to agree with his assessments. I'd like him to be kinder. He is confident in himself, but he needs to realize that sometimes you got to build up confidence in others. And some people who have certain things that don't work well, it's because they haven't figured it out yet. And help them become the kind of people who will figure it out and will be better.
He just does it in a harsh way.
Yeah. And, well, he does it in a way that gets viewers watching, too.
And some of those people might have gone home and practiced and become virtuosos.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We each react differently. In fact, some people need a 2x4 upside the head, as it were, metaphorically, to motivate them. And other people need a hug. And knowing what a person needs and being the flexible kind of a person. For example, you're the kind of a guy who I would say you always want to be nice.
What are you talking about?
Right.
Give me a hammer.
And sometimes being far more assertive and intolerant can give a person a line they need. And to be comfortable being able to be that person, but not hostile,
right.
And not because you're trying to be mean, but because you're really trying to help. And not that you'll ever pick it right. I mean, you and I have had a number of conversations over the years where sometimes I've been easygoing, sometimes I've been difficult. And I'm not saying that when I've been difficult that it was the right choice. I thought it was the right choice. But I hope you know me well enough to know that when I responded, I'm looking for the way I think is going to be best for the overall situation.
Well, I think you've helped me tremendously.
Well, thanks.
As a musician.
Oh, well, we've had a lot of fun together. Yeah, we had a great band.
I've become a better musician.
Check us out.
Because of this man.
Yeah. Go to YouTube and look up Reprise 60s, and you'll find Phil in there playing rhythm guitar, and me playing lead guitar, and what have you. And we've had a lot of fun with it. Well, you know what? We're out of time pretty much here, and I don't.
This is a nice guy.
Well, thanks. And that's pretty much all we need to talk about tonight. Kind of setting the stage for what we're going to do. And I hope that if you're finding this meaningful, that you'll come back next week. Phil will be here again, and we'll continue the series.
Maybe.
of Everybody Loves Phil. And I'll tell you, Phil, I love you. I think you're a great friend, and you've enriched my life, and I'm so glad that we know each other. And in a sense, you want to know something? I don't think I've ever told you this. Of all the friends I have, although we weren't buddy way back then, you're the one friend I have today that I've known you longer than anyone else I'm a friend with.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that weird?
I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
So it's an honor for me to have you here and helping me with this thing here. So,
well, I've really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm Bob Graves, the Unconventional Pastor, and hopefully we'll see you again on Sunday when I'll be teaching on something, and then next Wednesday come back for another part of the series of Everybody Loves Phil.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. In just a moment, the Cult of Honesty will be here on the Florida studio stage.